Red alert! Red alert! This is not a drill. Mario Kart World has received another major update in which 2 new Knockout Tour tracks have been released, with the confirmation that more are to follow. This is the major announcement we were waiting for, the new Mario Kart World content, and it is not only killer, it exemplifies what makes Mario Kart World so special and why the open world is the best in gaming. Far better than Grand Theft Auto 6 could ever hope to be. My prediction came true, essentially. I noticed that a lot of the level layouts in free roam mode looked as if they could be used in tracks, but were not. So I imagine that eventually Nintendo would update the game to incorporate more tracks, incorporate more ideas, incorporate like more circuits in both Knockout Tour and Grand Prix. You know, I came out and said it, and I was completely right. Nintendo has, with minimal effort, released a new update featuring 2 new Knockout Tour tracks completely for free. You did not have to pay a dime for this additional content. This is very exciting news for a couple of reasons. I think most prominently, the fact that it came out of nowhere. Nintendo released this update in the dead of night where nobody could report on it or notice it. So a lot of people are going to wake up tomorrow and notice that, like, hey, Mario Kart World has new features. It has more stuff, and there's going to be more stuff coming out. I feel like people don't understand, like, what a big deal this is. That, like, the biggest game on Switch 2, you know, Mario Kart, you know, bigger than Grand Theft Auto, bigger than Call of Duty, bigger than, like, pretty much every brand on the planet. Mario Kart is getting 3 new updates. Like, do you think that's not going to be a big deal? Do you think that's not going to move systems? Do you think, like, people are just going to ignore that? Like, the simple reality is that, like, this is a huge deal. Like, Nintendo could have easily charged for this. This easily could have been a season pass or a DLC or something. But no, it was a free update. And I don't believe it was one that came out of nowhere. I don't believe that they were not planning for this, because when you look at like Knockout Tour, when you look at like how the world is structured, when you look at like everything around, like they were always planning on adding in additional content. What this does is that it allowed people a full year to play the content that was available at launch, to become familiar with all the tracks, to become familiar with the characters and the mechanics, to get introduced to like the world of Mario Kart. And then over a period of time, they would slowly introduce new features, balance patches, and mechanics to the game. Like what we're seeing now is just a wildly different Knockout Tour track that just oozes style, oozes presentation, that takes you through completely different areas, completely different from anywhere else in the game. Like, this is something that should be celebrated by pretty much everyone. I have played the tracks myself. I went through them all. And I went through both of them, I should say. There's only 2. And yeah, I can confirm they're lengthy. They are intense. They have a lot of variety. They are completely distinct from each other and every other Knockout Tour track in the game. And it really just is a taste, a sample of what's to come. Like, Mario Kart World is going to be one of the best-selling games this year. Like, again, even a full year later, this game is topping the sales charts. It's the most relevant game on Switch 2. It's getting people talking. And now we're seeing an end to the age-old cope that this game doesn't have enough content. Because that's what a lot of people tried to tell us when this game came out, was this idea that, like, oh, yeah, I got first place in all the tracks, and now there's nothing left to do. Like, never mind that, like, online exists or time trial exists or, like, the free roam mode exists. Like, yeah, like, just say the game is over because you finished in first place in single player mode. Okay? Like, ignore all the other stuff that's happened. That's not going to be an excuse anymore, because what we've seen is that, like, Nintendo is updating games to give them a significant content updates like fairly regularly. Like we've seen this with like Donkey Kong Bonanza. We've seen this with this. We saw it with like Pokopia and like Pokemon Legends EA. Right? Like it's becoming increasingly common for Nintendo to drop content updates, occasionally for free, sometimes charged. It depends on the game and like what's actually being offered. But like what this means, okay, is that it's impossible for someone like Darkside Phil to come out and try and say that, like, oh yeah, I played through the entire game in 2 hours. Like, I legit tried to heard him try to say that. Is that like, well, I played through all the circuits in 2 hours, and now there's nothing left to do. Like, there's no consideration at all for like the kind of game this is, or like how replayable it is, or the online features. Yeah. Just finish all the circuits once and you're done with it. It's a really bad way of looking at things. You can't make that argument anymore. Okay, it's not even something you can even consider doing because of how this game is being treated. Like, not only did this game have like dozens and dozens of hours of content at launch, it is introducing more through its free updates. So people like Darkside Phil will just flail around and complain about how like, well, like this should have been here at launch, or that like it's not all that much. But like the reality is these kind of updates are going to keep this game relevant indefinitely. You're going to see people picking this game up every single time a new content update drops. You're going to see people talking about this game regularly. Like, not only was it the most successful game of 2025, it's also going to be a mainstay evergreen title for Nintendo Switch 2 for years going forward. Like this is so far beyond, I think, what most other games can accomplish that the rest of the industry can't even wrap its mind around it. Like I knew a lot of people who tried saying that Forza Horizon or Kirby Air Riders could compete with this, and what we're seeing is that simply isn't the case. It will be impossible to claim that you did everything in a Nintendo game in a weekend the way they did back in the 90s or whatever. Like, it's just not feasible. Like, you can't just ignore large chunks of content. You can't just ignore updates. You can't just brush it under the rug and try and say it should have been there from the start. Like, the simple fact of the matter is the game is very popular. It's very successful. People are playing it constantly, and like all the attempts at trying to bury this game have failed. And that brings me to like another point, is that the idea that the open world of Mario Kart World was completely pointless has been debunked as of this update. Like, because of how easy it is for Nintendo to use the open world to create like entirely original circuits, create entirely original ideas, create entirely new like knockout tours. Like, that should be something that should be exciting to people. Like, they already have all the assets in place. All they need to do really is put you in place and have you go along a track. That's it. Like, it is going to be remarkably simple and inexpensive to create new circuits using this formula. And I feel like people don't really understand that. People don't really understand like what this means, is that in theory, we could keep getting updates like this indefinitely. Okay. So we're going to be getting content drops like this forever. Like, we could be getting it like, 10 years from now, we could still be getting like new Mario Kart World updates, at least until the next one comes out. Right. Like, this is a game that has a very clear vision. And what happened when it came out was that like the audience just refused to accept the vision. The audience just like wanted to circle jerk and make things up and complain about things and just kind of like manufacture controversy. Like, the way things are looking now, it feels as if like all of the complaints people had about this game now are just completely bunk. Like, when you look at like the past year or so and see how much of it amounted to this idea that like Nintendo hasn't confirmed updates for this game, or Nintendo hasn't done enough to offer this game for $80, or like this game isn't worth like, isn't a good enough to be a system seller. Like, none of that is really going to hold water. Like, the simple fact of the matter is this game is going to get more and more popular every year. And the initial complaints from some fat retard like Darkside Phil, like, nobody is even going to know he played the game. Okay? Like, that's how little someone like that actually matters in the grand scheme of things. So if Mario Kart World is going to continue being a raging success for the entire console generation. What does that mean for the Switch 2? Like, the simple fact of the matter is, everyone threw everything they had against Mario Kart World to try and bury it and the console and Nintendo with it, and they failed. Okay. The simple fact of the matter is, the industry rallied to try and bury this game, to try and destroy it, to try and push people towards like Baldur's Gate 3 or like Expedition 33. Like, Mario Kart World outsold like Expedition 33 like day one. Okay. Like, it is crazy the power gap between like the actual game of the year versus like the fake as fuck game journo pick game of the year. Like, Mario Kart World was so much better than Expedition 33. It's not even like really worth talking about. But like, the simple fact of the matter is, like, the industry tried to bury this game. They tried to destroy it, and like, they failed. And they failed to do the same for the Switch too. And now the entire house of cards has collapsed. People are buying the Switch 2 en masse, and they're falling in love with Pokopia. They're falling in love with Tamagotchi Life. They're falling in love with Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. They're falling in love with Star Fox. Okay. And people have been like, flailing around trying to make excuses for this, like Nintendo fanboys, kids, remakes of old games. But the simple fact of the matter is that like, Nintendo is putting out the best product, the best hardware, and the best software, and they're running the best business. Like, no matter how much you scream and cry and you try to pretend otherwise, like, Nintendo has won the console war. And a situation like this, in which a universally reviled game, the most controversial release of 2025, like, it all just completely collapsed in a wet fart. 5 years from now, nobody's even going to remember the controversy around this game. Just like nobody remembers the controversy around Mario Kart 8. Remember when that wasn't going to save the Wii U and how that was going to be the worst selling Mario Kart ever? And remember how the character roster was awful? And remember how it was like, just not that good? Like, do you remember that? Like, Mario Kart World is going through the same process. Like, when are we going to learn that we can't take game journo opinions on games like this seriously? Like, there's a whole manner of reasons why, but I think the long and short of it is, like, Mario Kart and games like it are something that like people are going to be playing throughout the entire console generation. They are going to be the most recognizable games on the platform no matter what. So like, the attempts at trying to gaslight people into thinking that like, oh, this doesn't have replay value, this doesn't have enough content, like, this game isn't as good as previous entries, like, it's all going to fall on deaf ears, right? Because like, the more people play these games, the more they're going to love them. Like, the problem with game journos is that they don't play games enough to understand the appeal of a lot of core Nintendo franchises. It won't be too much longer, I think, where people who grew up with Mario Kart World and not 8 Deluxe will declare this to be the best Mario Kart game of all time. Like, because of the mechanics, because of the world, because of the character selection screen. Like, the idea that 8 Deluxe is like the best Mario Kart is just, it was a desperate attempt at trying to play Mario Kart World and nothing more. Okay, because I remember when the same people were like attacking 8, 7, and Wii. Okay. Like, I remember when people were holding like DS to this like impossible standard, right? Double Dash to the same impossible standard. Like, we've seen this happen over and over again. Like, this is just a method of downplaying Nintendo games for the audience. And I do think that really does need to be understood going forward, is that like, this is not an isolated incident. You are going to see a lot of the same like things happen to like Rhythm Heaven, to Fortune's Weave, to Splatoon Raiders, like all the big upcoming like Nintendo titles coming out in the next couple of months. And like, it's something that we really do need to take a stand against. Okay. Because if it happened to Mario Kart World, it's going to happen to other games. But Mario Kart World is like the most mainstream title on the planet, right? Nothing is more popular than Mario Kart. Okay. For the less popular games, like, these kinds of critical attacks like tend to blemish the game's reputation. Like, something like Star Fox Zero still has not recovered from like the onslaught it got pre-release. Okay. Something like Codename Steam, is pretty much forgotten today because of how much the game journos who were shown it behind closed doors, like, seethed about it not being Majora's Mask 3D. Like, you look at like what the community at large is doing. You look at what's happening with them. You look at how they behave and how they act, and like you just come away with this feeling that you can't really trust any of them. Metroid Prime 4 is in the process of recovering from like its weird nonsensical like controversies, and Mario Kart World I think has beaten them a long time ago. But like this stuff does matter. Like you're not being a fanboy for addressing the fact that like criticisms of these games don't hold up under any kind of scrutiny, that they can't be taken seriously, that they don't make a whole lot of sense. Like you're basically just asserting basic observations essentially. And in Mario Kart World's case, it was very obvious that this game was going to get an expansion or update of some kind immediately. But again, if this is a game that people have to put 40 hours into to see everything, to do everything, like they didn't need to have free updates immediately. It's just kind of my mentality on it. Like the fact that they waited this long, I think demonstrates like how much work and effort they put into these updates. And they also didn't need to push out updates right away. It is just the reality of it. Like all the updates are there for is to keep adding new content for people who have seen everything in the game several times now. It's to keep it fresh. It's to keep it exciting. And it doesn't mean that the base game was bad or that it desperately needed the updates. In short, Mario Kart World was a masterpiece when it first came out, and it's only going to get better with time. And as it gets better with time, more and more people are going to become fans of the game, and more, the initial criticisms that the game received are going to look more and more ridiculous and outdated. And this leads back into my final point. Something I've been saying since the Splatoon days is that we cannot rely on day one reviews of Nintendo products anymore. We see these kind of situations all the time where updates are made and changes, expansions come out that like completely redefine what a game is, and we see more and more often that like games like say Fire Emblem Three Houses that go under the radar initially become like massive cult classics later on. Okay. Like we've seen this happen times and time again. And like, it's high time that we really start acknowledging what that means. Like if updating games is a staple in the industry, it should be something that is addressed when it comes to these kind of releases. Like if a game like this is obviously going to get updates and it's obviously going to get new courses and it's obviously going to have more features later on, like why should we approach the massive 40-hour long experience and try and tell people that like it doesn't have enough content, that it doesn't like that it didn't have everything it needed to have, that like it wasn't good enough? Like the simple reality is that like that isn't true. Like the simple reality is that like it was a finished game at launch, but the updates and the patches are just to make the experience better. The day one reviews are outdated because they will not like they could not account for all the changes and all the things that they would add to this game over the past year. And this isn't even the first update. They've done numerous balance patches. They've added a new multiplayer mode. Like this is just the first major update to hit the main game. And I think this is going to be the one that people look back on as like the major turning point for Mario Kart World and the Switch 2. Like the point where everybody acknowledges the Switch 2 and Mario Kart World as being huge successes. But like, are the journos going to apologize for that? Are they going to update their reviews? Are they going to acknowledge that this game was a masterpiece? No, they're not. They're going to keep running damage control for like whatever slop is coming out, Grand Theft Auto 6 probably, and just kind of ignore this absolute masterpiece of a game.